Hello, my name is Sheree Costa and welcome back to the YouTube channel for Dancing with My Mother. I want to revisit the subject of HPPD, Hallucinogen Persisting Perception Disorder. And in this video, I wanted to discuss my own personal, or part of my own personal journey with my son, Joey, who had HPPD type 2, and he had it from age 17 to age 27. And unfortunately, he is no longer with us today. And I attribute that in great part to him having contracted, if that's the word, for HPPD, and having to deal with it for 10 years. So let me tell you my journey, because I'm hoping that perhaps it might help not only people who have HPPD and feel very alone, but also this is very much for the loved ones of someone who has HPPD, because that is also a very lonesome journey. So when Joey was 17, with his friends, they would start taking LSD, magic mushrooms, things like that. This is probably not as uncommon as you think, but some people walk away from these experiences and go, well, I've done it now. And other people want to keep pushing the envelope. And unfortunately, my son was one of those. Now, before I go into this, I'll just tell you, I'm telling you as if I knew what was going on at the time, but I didn't. This is all after the fact. Joey told me later how it all progressed and what happened. So in fact, it was 9 months after he contracted HPPD that I found out that he had it. So just for the moment, assume that it's Joey telling you the story, if you like. So when he was 17 and his friends were experimenting with LSD, magic mushrooms, they, up until that time, they hadn't really had any bad experiences. They just had a lot of fun, I guess, if you could call it that. I wouldn't know. I've never taken a psychedelic in my life, and I never want to. But they were at that age, and it was that kind of group. So that's what they did. Not all the time, but they did do it. And there was no real ill side effects. Everyone kept going to school or work if they'd already left school. Joey was, at that time, in his last 2 terms, well, that's what we call it, perhaps in America it would be called a semester, of his last year of high school, which is called in Australia HSC, Higher School Certificate. And it was no picnic, him getting through it, but he was getting through it with a lot of me cracking the whip behind him, but he was all right, okay? So on the fringe of this group that he was hanging with, there was a guy that, from what Joey told me, none of the others really liked that much, but he seemed to like them and he hung around them, but they weren't comfortable with him. This guy was a bit more maverick, perhaps, than everybody else. And he said to them one day, we should try this new kind of LSD, which actually wasn't new, but that's what he said, called LSA. Now, you'll have to look that up because I'm not going to go into some scientific explanation of what that is. But what they didn't do is they didn't do their research, because the research then would have shown them that LSA can give you a much more powerful trip and oftentimes is not a pleasant trip. So this guy said it'll give us a much better experience, a much stronger experience. But he didn't tell them, and maybe he didn't know, that this kind of LSD called LSA was going to have some bad side effects. Understatement. So they took the LSA, and Joey told me that the trip that he had was the first time it was unpleasant. He said it was scary. He couldn't wait for it to end. It was a terrible experience, and everyone else felt the same way. So it wasn't good. when he woke up the next morning, he felt like he was still in the trip. Everything hurt his eyes. Everything became a visual nightmare. So halos around things, light trails, floaters, little sparkly things in the corner of his eyes. He said it was horrendous. And so he just put his head back under the covers and thought, this will go. It was just so strong that it's taking a while to subside. But it didn't. By the time he had to go back to school, he was severely distressed. And that's when my interactions with Joey changed from, I know he's doing things he shouldn't be doing, and I have no idea how to really stop him other than locking him in his room, to why is he in his room and won't come out? The shades are drawn, the lights are out, and he didn't seem to want to do anything. And he was incredibly distracted when he did emerge, and he also didn't want to go to school. So after a period of time, I just had to force him to go to school. I said, there's nothing wrong with you, go to school. Not knowing, of course, that he had HPPD. But that's when the wheels fell off at school, because he couldn't see things on the page because all the letters and the words were just melting and warping, and teachers' faces would be changing right in front of him. He couldn't look at anybody. He was in such distress. And then the panic attacks started. And I, again, didn't know. So he started to miss school, and he would come home and just get under the covers. Homework wasn't being done, assignments weren't being done. And as you know, if you're in the last year of high school, there's a lot of assignments. Nothing was happening. And then I started getting the letters home from school saying, Joey hasn't done this, Joey hasn't done that. And I'd question Joey about it. He'd say, I'll get onto it, I'll get onto it. But there was something wrong with him. He was distracted, really within himself. And I had no idea what was going on. It wasn't long before he said, I'm leaving school. Of course, his father and I fought him on that, saying, you've got, 8 weeks left, maybe 10 weeks, and then you've got exams, and then you're finished, and you have the chance then to go to university, all that stuff that you've talked about for so long. And he just said, I can't do it, I can't do it. And now I know why, of course. Now, I just backtrack for a second to tell you that Joey had always aspired to be an actor, and not just a run-of-the-mill actor, but one that could work anywhere in the world, who could then maybe go on to make his own films, TV series, write scripts, write plays. He was incredible with the humanities. He could read fluently by the time he was 5 or 6. Now, I didn't know, of course, that he wasn't able to read anything, but I did know that we were very close now to being able to audition for NIDA. And to get into NIDA, which is a 3-year program, you had to have graduated from high school with a decent mark. And here we were, so close to the finish line. The NIDA auditions are usually in October, November, so they wait till all the school exams are over. And he wanted to leave school. It didn't make any sense. This was all he had talked about since he was about 8. None of it made any sense. He spent most of his time in his room, and if I'd say to him, you should go out, it's a beautiful day, go for a swim, he just wouldn't do it. And I did find out later on, through a series of events, that he felt he was having a heart attack. Now, what was happening was that he was actually having a massive panic attack. And it got so bad that he rang myself and he rang his father and said, you have to get me to a hospital. And this is when it all came out eventually. Because, of course, the hospital said there's nothing wrong with your heart. You're hale and hearty, and nothing wrong. But his panic attack had caused his heart to beat very fast. And I've never had one of those kind of panic attacks. I've had many ones, and not very often. But I believe a true full-on panic attack is just horrendous. So he had been having those nonstop. So about 9 months after he had had this terrible trip on LSA, that was when he came to us. As a result of that, he ended up being diagnosed with HPPD. And I will tell you, it wasn't a doctor here that diagnosed him because nobody here had heard of it. Joey, being Joey, got onto the internet and researched and was looking everywhere for his symptoms and what they might mean. Now we know what Dr. Google is like. It's terribly inaccurate sometimes. But there was just too much evidence, too many Reddit groups, too many instances of people saying they had these symptoms, what's wrong with me? Those that had been diagnosed, it was textbook HPPD 2. Now there are two kinds of HPPD. HPPD 1 is where it's more like a flashback, not totally unpleasant. I guess it does upset some people, but they come and go. It's not there all the time. And in a lot of cases, they either cease or they start to die down, and it's something the person can still live with and cope with. HPPD 2 is chronic, as in the case of my son, who had it for 10 years, where the symptoms become so big and so massive that they start to cause other problems like anxiety, panic attacks, depression, depersonalization, derealization. I think Joey had all of it because his entire dream of being an actor and a writer and a filmmaker, that was all there in front of him. Now, you need to be able to look people in the eye when you're acting. You need to be able to write without the words melting off the page. To learn lines, you've got to be able to look at the script and then learn those lines without all the distracting visual symptoms of floaters and sparkly things and light trails. Can you imagine trying to learn 2 lines of dialogue with all that going on? Imagine an entire script like that. It would be way too hard. I'm an actor and I can barely stand it when I have any kind of minor distraction, let alone those kind of symptoms to deal with, especially when you're going through it alone, which is what Joey did for so long. I just want to backtrack too. The boys who had the LSA with Joey, from what Joey told me, not one of them came out of that unscathed. Whether it was symptoms like HPPD or there were other things that happened to those boys, I won't go into them because it's not my place to do that, but not one of them came out of that night unscathed. Interesting and tragic. So my son had his entire ambitions and dreams ripped away from him. Yes, it was self-inflicted, and you can judge all you like. But do you honestly think that any young man with the kind of brain that he had really wanted that to be his reality for the rest of his short life? No. No. So that's how it happened for us. I'm sure I've missed out a lot of things here. But with Joey's HPPD, just to go back to the diagnosis, he asked to be admitted into a mental health hospital, and he went in there, and thank goodness there is a wonderful psychiatrist there who listened to Joe and then did his own research. And this psychiatrist, because he did listen to my son, got in touch with Dr. Henry Abraham, who at that time was one of the very, very few medical professionals who knew about HPPD, and not only did he know about it, but was the leader in research and in treatment at that time. And thank goodness for that. So these two doctors talked to each other. He talked to Joey, and that's how we came to the diagnosis of HPPD for certain. So I can't thank either of those doctors enough. And also because my son had such an inquiring mind and wanted to know what was wrong with him so he could fix it. I'd just like to say too that Joey stayed away from all kinds of substances during the 9 months from when he got HPPD till when he told his father and I that something was very wrong. He meditated, he tried to do everything he could. He didn't even drink coffee or tea. He just wanted to live as clean as possible, had the best diet he could, believing that perhaps he could cure himself. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Now, I don't know if that's of use to anyone out there, but if a loved one is watching this, this is a slightly different viewpoint from what you might see where people have posted on YouTube talking about their HPPD and how it feels to them. But this is from my side, from a parent's side or a carer side of things. And I would say to you, the first thing is don't give up. There's many more options now. No, they haven't found a cure, but there's many more options now to ease their discomfort. There's a whole podcast perhaps on the kinds of drugs that are available. And I will tell you this, it's pretty certain that SSRIs, which a lot of psychiatrists might say, well, your son, your daughter has depression and anxiety and this will help them. Do your research before you do anything like that, because it can make it worse, the visual symptoms of HPPD. I'll also say to you, if you don't know this already, that having HPPD doesn't mean that you have bipolar or schizophrenia or anything like that. It's actually not a mental disorder, it's a visual disorder, but it can lead to other things if it's long term. I am astounded that Joey never ended up with bipolar. He certainly didn't have an easy 10 years, but he didn't have schizophrenia, he didn't have bipolar, but he had terrible, terrible depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and all the other things I've talked about. All right, I think that's enough for now. Sorry, it's all a bit dire, this content, but that is partly why I started this YouTube channel, and it needs to be talked about. So that's what I'm doing today. All right.